We'll call our Finance and Administration Committee meeting to order. First up, for public hearings and public comments, tonight we will hold the official public hearing on the 2020 budget for the City of Mission, Rock Creek Drainage District Number 1, and Rock Creek Drainage District Number 2. The notice of the public hearing was published in the legal record on July 23rd, 2019. At this time, I would like to officially open the public hearing and invite City Administrator Laura Smith to give a brief presentation. Following the presentation, we will open the hearing up to any member of the public who would like to comment on the 2020 recommended budget.
Thank you, and I have been educated on what brief means versus my last budget presentation. This evening, thank you all for being here tonight, is our formally required budget public hearing on the 2020 budget. So I will cover about 13 highlights from the 2020 budget as recommended. Certainly have an opportunity to take any questions. But the city's 2020 budget includes 16 individual funds that represent about $26.89 million in estimated expenditures. There are no tax or fee increases included in the 2020 budget, and we're anticipating to maintain a mill rate of approximately 7.866 mills, 7 of which are dedicated to streets. The balance are dedicated to support general fund operations. Within the general fund, which is our largest portion of the annual budget, $13.49 million in revenue is estimated in 2020, which is a 2% increase over the 2019 budget. Expenditures are estimated in the amount of $13.59 million, which is actually a 1% decrease over the 2019 budget. In the general fund, the 2020 recommended budget includes funding for the highest priority capital and technology resources for the departments, and that includes permitting software, public works equipment to support snow removal and street maintenance, frontline patrol fleet replacement, and in-car and body camera replacement in the police department. Supplemental programs funded in the 2020 budget include an update to the greenhouse gas inventory, increased tree maintenance on public property, reestablishing a full-time planner's position in community development, and converting 2 previously authorized over-hire positions in the police department to full-time to create a directed patrol unit. One of the biggest highlights in the general fund for 2020 is that we continue to successfully build fund balance. We are now sitting at approximately 35% of our general fund revenues, and our fund balance, the council's policy, is 25%. So you actually have an excess general fund balance to the tune of about $1.1 million. On the capital improvement program, this is our 5-year program that covers streets, stormwater, parks and recreation. Generally, these infrastructure investments are supported by dedicated revenue streams, which helps us to increase our transparency and accountability for the public in these projects. The 2020 projects are adopted with the annual budget, and the other 4 years of the program are adopted in concept. In 2020, the projects, in 2020 across the CIP program, we expect to have $6.47 million in revenues and $11.99 million in expenses. Expenses do exceed revenues because of carryover balances for prior years for some large projects that will be completed. The biggest projects incorporated in the CIP for 2020 include the Rock Creek Channel project from behind the Mission Bowl property to Roland Drive, resurfacing of Lamar, and construction of restrooms at Mohawk Park. We also budget for several other funds of some significance as we put the annual budget together. Those include our Mission Convention and Visitors Bureau. We've recommended the purchase of 2 sets of banners from that fund to be displayed along Johnson Drive in 2020. In our special alcohol fund, we continue to use those resources to support our mental health co-responder program, our DARE, and the drug and alcohol programs supported through the United Community Services. In the solid waste utility fund, we will be reviewing in September responses to our invitation to bid for new solid waste haulers for a citywide residential contract. That we have recommended holding the prices the same in the 2020 budget, but we will be evaluating those and looking at a new contract to become effective January 1st. And then the other funds are really just development project tracking funds for those projects which have TIF and CID committed to them. So with that, that is sort of the very high-level overview of the city's 2020 budget. We have been working on it since May, and the council will review the final recommended budget on your committee agenda this evening, and then hopefully advance that to your August 21st city council meeting for final adoption. We will then, if adopted, we'll certify that to the county by August 25th, and the new budget will take effect January 1st of 2020. That's all I have.
Is there anyone else who would like to address the council in public? Seeing no one, the public hearing is officially closed. The council will discuss the budget later on this evening's Finance and Administration agenda. So now tonight we don't have any public presentations. We do have 7 action items and 1 discussion item. Our first action item is acceptance of the July 10th, 2019 Finance and Administration Committee minutes. Martha.
Yes, minutes were in the packet, and if there are any corrections or amendments, please let me know.
I'd say we accept it.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have the 2020 budget resolution. Laura?
Yes, so there's several items in your packet. The first of which is, several years ago we started as a part of our annual budget process, adopting a budget resolution that really tried to capture that high-level view of the policies and priorities that were incorporated into the annual budget into one document, so that we were able to very clearly and easily and quickly communicate with the public those things which were the drivers and the outcomes of our annual budget process. The draft resolution that is included in your packet reflects those things that went into the development and consideration of the 2020 budget, many of which I just touched on during the public hearing. We do try to separate those into 2 categories. So generally we look at a section 1 deals with those policies that relate to our 5-year capital improvement program and the maintenance of public infrastructure. Section 2 looks at those policies and priorities that support our general fund operations and help maintain basic services and city operations. So I'm happy to either answer questions on these, or I can run through them point by point. But I think it's really pretty straightforward. We've talked about really all of these issues as we've gone through the budget process over the last several months.
Any comments or questions on our budget resolution?
Take that resolution to council.
Non-consent. Next up, we have our 2020 to 2024 CIP resolution.
Yes, thank you. It's similar to the annual budget resolution. For many years, we didn't actually have a 5-year capital improvement program. So as we started back in about 2010 to really kind of focus on putting one together, this was pre-capital improvement program committee. And we had a lot of discussion and debate around the council in terms of how we wanted to communicate priorities related to large capital infrastructure projects, whether we wanted to show actually in a 5-year capital improvement plan projects which would result in negative fund balances in out years. And so there's a lot of, again, conversation and give and take around that. So one of the things that we started to do was to create this CIP resolution as well. What we found as in this age of everything being digital and online is that when we go back and try to look and search historically, it's really wonderful if we have the opportunity to find a resolution or an ordinance or something that is reflected on a council agenda that can summarize those points. It helps point us in that right direction. So in many ways, these resolutions that we pass surrounding the budget and the CIP annually really just create those touch points and allow us to go back kind of quickly and find those priorities. So you will see really this just captures the revenues and expenditures, which I had already touched on, that are anticipated in the 2020 budget. The program areas that we fund, And then section 3 is really just an opportunity to kind of keep on the radar screen projects that have been talked about at some point in the past. We haven't really assigned a priority to them, and many of them don't have detailed costs associated, but so if you look at some of the major street construction projects, in section 3A, those were things that came out of the West Gateway visioning process and the form-based code process, Rock Creek floodplain. So many of these came out of studies, processes, and procedures, and we again want to be able to just capture and for future reference, make sure that they stay a part of our conversation as we think about how they get integrated into a CIP. So this is just reflective of that, and again, kind of just helps us create that historical marker.
Do we have any questions or comments on our CIP resolution?
Take it to council.
Consent? And next up, we have adoption of our 2020 budget.
So your budget materials, again, we covered kind of all of the details. You've seen all of these pages before, but this is the complete recommended budget and CIP for 2020. I'm sorry that Brian couldn't be here with us this evening because he has put a tremendous amount of effort and energy into and does every year developing this, as does the rest of the staff and the department directors. But this is so as we move this forward, you would, in anticipation or on the 21st, adopt the budget resolutions, and then you would adopt each one of these three budgets, the city's overall budget, the Rock Creek Drainage District number 1 and Rock Creek Drainage District number 2 budgets separately, as they all three have their own independent tax levy authority. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions on that, but I think we've covered a lot of that over the last month and a half or so.
Really appreciate all the work.
Thank you.
Brian's done this. It's terrific. And all staff.
Anything else for Laura? And next up, we have a charter ordinance changing the date for swearing in of newly elected officials. Laura again.
Yes, so Senate Bill 105 became effective July 1st, and Senate Bill 105 allows cities to set the date when newly elected officials will take office. You may recall that previously, when we transitioned to the November elections, November and odd years, the state statutes prescribed that the newly elected officials were to be sworn in the second Monday in January. So in our instance, we were required to call a special meeting to swear in elected officials. And it makes, I think, that transition a little bit confusing and difficult sometimes. So this year, the Senate bill was passed, which allows us a little more discretion in setting that date for swearing in. It must fall between December 1st, so after the November election has been certified, and the second Monday in January. And if we don't set a specific date, then it defaults to that second Monday in January that was previously mandated by state statute. Because we set those election parameters by a charter ordinance, it requires a charter ordinance in order for us to amend that. So we have presented revisions to Charter Ordinance number 27, or amendments to Charter Ordinance 27, that was approved by Council in October of 2015, that would move our new swearing-in date to our December City Council meeting, so that we would not be looking at calling a special meeting to do that. The Charter Ordinance, you have to publish it once a week for 2 consecutive weeks, and then it will not take effect until 61 days. And I think we looked at this would then become effective November 3rd.
Any questions for Laura?
Take to council, I don't know, should this be non-consent or consent?
I think it should probably go on the regular agenda.
Okay. Then next up, we have the selection of voting delegates for LKM and NLC. Martha?
Each year, you have the opportunity to select voting delegates for the business meeting of both National League of Cities and the League of Kansas Municipalities business meetings. This year for LKM, Councilmember Inman is going, Councilmember Davis is going, and Brian Footlick, or Brian Footlick. I actually talked to him recently. Brian Scott is going, so you can select your voting delegates from those attendees, and then for NLC at this time, Councilmember Kring and Councilmember Schlossmacher are attending. So for LKM, we're allowed to have 3 voting delegates, and for NLC, we have 1 voting delegate and 1 alternate. So, if you have suggestions of who you'd like to recommend. For LKM, since we just have 3 people attending,
That would be 3, right?
that would be the 3, I think.
I didn't realize it.
I don't know if anyone else is interested in attending, though. Let me know. There's still time to register, of course, and it is in Overland Park this year, so it's a great opportunity to attend that when it's local. So, and then for NLC, we have both Debbie and Nick attending this year. So
I'd like to nominate Councilmember Kring as the voting member. Probably leave me as the alternate.
that would leave you as the alternate. That's correct.
That's one way to get there.
Okay.
Plus Pat wants to do it.
Okay. I think you're good to go then.
All right, thanks.
So will this go to consent agenda then?
Okay. If everyone's okay with that.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
And for our final action item, we have the Consolidated Fire District Number 2 Street Solicitation Application. Also,
Yep. Every year, Consolidated Fire District Number 2 with IAFF Local 1371, they do a boot block that supports muscular dystrophy. In the past, it's been at Johnson Drive and Broadmoor, but with construction, they're going to move it to Johnson Drive and Lamar if approved, and they'll do it over Labor Day weekend. So,
Take, consider it.
Yeah, consent.
sounds good.
thank you very much.
And then we also have one discussion item for tonight, the refresh of the city website. Emily.
Good evening. We are here to discuss the city's website, missionks.org. We have been in a contract with Municipal CMS, a website services company, since 2014. As part of their services to us, after 48 months of service with them, we are offered a complimentary sort of refresh of the site, which of course, based on trends, it's timely. So things start to look faded and out of date relatively quickly in the website world, and so we, if anyone's doing the math, are a bit overdue in taking advantage of this service, but feel like we can take it on now. They have a number, it's mostly an aesthetic change, it's a refresh, but there are certain updates to functionality. Key among them is really more compatibility with all types of mobile devices. I think we've sort of band-aided functionality on mobile devices with our existing site. It's better than original, it's better than our previous site, but it isn't quite right, and it isn't current, and it will be much, much friendlier with the following changes. At the same time, we do the refresh with new photography, new layout, those types of things. The theme will for sure be most prominent on the homepage. We'll trickle through the other pages. We'll also do a comprehensive site review with the staff of the Municipal CMS for a nominal charge, just to go through page by page, which is the sort of discipline work that often gets overlooked. But with their guidance, things like just common conventions that we may have strayed from over the edits as we go through the years. So we'll be doing that. So I think rolling out, although the focus is really a refresh, there's, as you saw in the examples provided in the packet, a nod toward kind of icons and, it looks kind of more smart app type symbology on the front page, which I think will feel more current and fresh. And then we'll come out with new photography and that page overview, which will feel, I think, a lot cleaner, and just having, the fine-tooth comb treatment now that it's been several years. So we wanted to come to you, let you know that that was happening. We feel confident moving ahead. If there's strong feelings on the design, we sort of put them in the packet roughly in order of preference, but I gave preference to the ones that really do highlight those icons. I think those seem more of trend to me and further from our existing site that still relies pretty heavily on the text boxes. I don't know if any of you visited the sites, but I have them up, or we can talk about preference. But we have an appointment with the same company that provided the drone video footage to do some aerial photography. We just, obviously that one of the sunset on Johnson Drive has gotten a lot of mileage. My group's internal and external since we took it. So we see that one popping up all over the place. So I think just more photos along the lines of those, and potentially seasonally. I really like that idea as well. And of course we have been just using this photo that they provided us when we rolled it out, which is clearly not in Mission and has never been in Mission. So it's time to sort of get more local that way. So just wanted to let you know that that was,
I just wanted to make sure that we ensure, I'd like to see it, and maybe it's out there and I haven't looked at it for a few days.
Sure.
But something under events, with all the pictures that all of us have taken and sent to you, I know that's hard on you. If we could do something more mainstream, and we could get pictures to you in a different format or whatever, so people love to go out and look at their community pictures.
yeah, that's a great idea. Great.
No, go ahead, you started.
Well, I trust your recommendations in terms of the look, and I think that, that first one looks good.
It's kind of, once you're in it.
It's a clean.
Yeah, and our photography will make it look quite a bit different anyway, and if something was askew, I know that they would work with us to get it the way we wanted it to be, so.
Thank you. I have no idea, but do we, and I'm assuming we do, track the traffic that goes to that website, and how does that compare, like in the last few years? Has it been increasing, declining? Is the Facebook traffic increasing, the website decreasing? Because I know there's a lot of other forms of
Right.
communication which seem to be more popular now, even though I am not a tweeter.
Right.
So, yeah, I'm just curious what the trend is here.
Yeah, we've tracked, so our site is on Google Analytics. We don't spend a lot of time analyzing it, to be honest. We can do, and the staff can help us also with that, to track over time especially. And then we have been doing kind of periodic snapshots of all of the social media channels that we have and the numbers that are increasing. And I would say just in terms of, the biggest shift I have seen is in terms of direct dialogue with residents. Happens so much more frequently through all the social media channels. Messaging services, that real city business and requests are coming to me through the social media feeds, and then I'm shepherding them to the departments versus a standard email or the report of concern on the website. It's still very popular. That has always been popular since the site went live, with people sending requests for services or issues through the site. But more so, picking up the phone and emailing are still there, but reporting a down tree branch on Facebook message is really, really common.
Seeing a lot more of that.
Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering how long you think this refresh will last us?
Well, I think if you started to use their benchmark of 48 months and worked backwards so that you were ready for it right when that hit, instead of realizing that deadline and having it go by, I think 3 to 4 years makes good sense. I do think, I remember the site that we had previous and how far gone that felt. It was just really, really, really overdue at that point, and I don't think that we're to that degree currently, but I just think you stay on top of it. You just do it a little bit sooner rather than later each time. But I'm just using their contract and sort of best practice as a guiding piece. If we had been on top of this to roll out at the beginning or end of 2017, beginning of 2018, I think it would have been right on time, probably.
So we still will be able to report a concern on the website, is that correct? Because right now, I don't see that we can do any attachment.
Oh,
Like if
yeah.
we want to do a picture or something,
Yeah,
that
we
might
could,
be helpful. I mean,
Sure.
it sounds like you can do that on Facebook, but
yeah, and we had, well, that's true. And we can look at it. They offer us a whole separate module that's above and beyond the report of concern, but it's, I think it raises expectations that we were not hitting with, in terms of just, the tracking was different with how our folks operate, and so it just felt like we were layering on more than we needed, which was really just eyes on the street. But you're right about the attachments, and we could look into just adding that to the existing. It could very well be attachment document instead of a
That'd be
whole
awesome.
separate module that seems kind of above and beyond what we were needing.
and then are we still doing like YourGov or YouGov or?
No, right, no.
I deleted that app.
We need to get that.
I would try to use it, it kept showing up, coming from my house, like I had all these
Are you
problems.
skipping from it? Okay, so I guess yes. I didn't realize.
I sent a bunch of things to you.
Okay.
Still got it.
That way-
Okay. I misunderstood that. So, yeah, then the report of concern seems, I mean, extremely popular at all hours of the day. You know, it feels intuitive to some people at least, based on just pure volume and the variety of requests we get. Anything else for Emily?
Thank you very much, Emily.
Thanks, Emily.
Okay, and then, department updates. Laura, do you have anything else?
Well, I do have one, because I was trying to be so efficient with the budget process that I forgot to talk about something that I know I've had some questions on. So there's been a lot of sort of news and conversation in the last week around an article that appeared in the Kansas City Star related to concerns in Johnson County about declining sales tax revenues and the dark store theory impacts and ramifications of the dark store theory, now that we know that that is kind of continuing to work its way all the way up to the Kansas Supreme Court. So, you know, we do monitor every month where we are in terms of sales tax revenues. And it's interesting for us, as I look at just year to date and do a comparison. I mean, I think some of the numbers that you saw, if you read that article or heard anything on the radio, you know, we're talking about, you know, Miriam seeing 9% decrease in revenues from particularly auto sales, and a lot of people sort of scratching their head wondering, you know, what's happening and what's driving that. For us, we continue to actually not only maintain but see some small growth in our sales tax revenues. So in 2018, through basically 5 months of reporting, we had collected just shy of $1 million. Through that same time period in 2019, we're up 3% in collections from where we were in 2018. In our use tax collections, we are down about 7% when I look at that same snapshot, but you have to sort of carve that out and take that in context as it relates to where we budget. And use tax, we've exceeded our budgeted figure for the last several years by upwards of 75%. So even when we're seeing that 7% decrease in our use tax revenues, we're still very conservative when we put the budget together and bring that forward for you all, so that, and obviously that's been one of the best ways that we've been able to rebuild our general fund balance, is not committing or overestimating really any of our revenue streams, but particularly our sales tax revenue streams. And those are the things that have fed into that rebuild and getting us to that 35% of general fund balance. So obviously we will continue to watch that, but I think that at this point in time, it appears that we maybe aren't experiencing some of the same trends as some of the other cities. I think in part that has something to do with our size. You know, we are limited by the number of large retailers that we have, and the larger retailers that we have are often places where people continue to spend money even in times of an economic downturn, which we certainly aren't there yet. So I think when we look at the diversification across our revenue sales tax base and just what's happening and how people are spending those dollars and what those drivers are, I think I feel pretty comfortable this point that there's no red flags or really even yellow flags for us to be waving at this point, but we certainly, as I said, we monitor that every month. And we'll make adjustments, as necessary if we would start to see that. With respect to the dark store theory, in fact, the appraiser's office just sent out some information today that Brian and I haven't had a chance to even sort through, and they were missing a couple of attachments, so we're still in the process of collecting some information. Several years ago when we sat down with the appraiser, I think they estimated a potential annual loss in revenue to the city of Mission to the tune of about $30,000. So not, again, while not insignificant, not a tremendous impact to an annual budget. And we are certainly going to have plenty of time to react and respond to that because that whole issue is working its way through the legal system and the court system. So I'd be happy to answer any other questions, but I think for now, I'm happy to report that I feel like we're in a very strong position and that we will continue to be conservative, both in our revenue estimating and our expenditures, so that we don't find ourselves having to play catch up over the course of the fiscal year.
The majority of the use tax from the businesses.
It depends. So the majority, the big swings in our use tax have really related more to facility upgrades and equipment that businesses may be purchasing as they're doing those. We've seen more of that then. So the vehicle sales is somewhat limited, but it's not a huge component of where we are. There's a page, and I didn't bring it this evening, but I can certainly share it again. There's a statistical table in the audit each year that breaks down by category, general categories, kind of where our sales tax revenues are coming from. And what you'll see across that spectrum is, again, that kind of diversification and that balance, and that we're not particularly dependent on any one category. So I can certainly include that or include a link to that with the weekly report this week, just as a kind of a refresher. Kristen?
I had a question in regards to the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court and Wayfair decision that states and I believe municipalities can start to collect sales tax on internet sales. I mean, where are we on that? If we're anywhere or?
We're nowhere at this point, so we can certainly take a look at that and get back to you on that issue.
Okay, all right, great, thank you.
And I would point to Laura, something I think came out from the State Department of Revenue this week, so that might be something to look at.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have to come through the state anyway on the sales tax, right? It's like it does now. Yeah, it does now, so from the internet, same thing, so they're the ones that will have to initiate that, so we can't go out.
But we've got a separate 1% sales tax for the city, and then we've got the 3/8, and we've got the 3/4 for the streets too, so.
That's already being collected, almost the big on.
I don't know, that's my question.
It is, yes, so.
On the major ones.
Yeah, Amazon hits you.
Okay, but then there's other retailers like that aren't, like have a brick and mortar here within the state that I don't believe we're getting sales tax on that right now. I don't know, that's my question.
It's hard to audit everyone on retail.
I understand, I'm just.
No, we can certainly,
Okay.
Brian and I can work on kind of pulling together some information and providing an update on that
Okay, great, thank
situation
you.
as well.
Anything else for Laura? Thank
No,
you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
But I do have another.
And other?
Yeah, we're at other, and you had department updates.
Oh, okay, so we have
I
Pat's
have,
update?
I
Sure.
I don't have an update, I have an other.
Other,
Oh, and other, okay.
we skipped other.
Yeah.
is what it
Oh, I see, yes.
This should come under community
Under other.
development, but really just a reminder to you guys that August 17th, Saturday, we're gonna have another Harvesters food event, food pickup event here in Mission at the same place over at China Mission North. yourself and see, find somebody else to come with you and volunteer for that. But Susie Miller, actually Debbie's husband, Lynn Crane, is kind of in charge of the volunteers, so let one of them know.
What
We
time
look
is
forward to
that?
seeing them. And they're gonna have the volunteers there at 8 a.m. And I think that's cutting it close because they're talking about trying to start distributing food around 8:30.
Yeah, that's gonna be crazy.
It might be a little tough. But I think the truck with the food will get there by 8:30. So we're not gonna be passing out food for you. But people will be lining up. They get there, it was a great event last time. And they expect it to be quite a bit bigger percentage-wise this time. So. Okay, that's my other.
That concludes our finance and administration.
Outstanding.
Do we need a break or can we move?
I lost my red. If anybody sees a necklace with a cross on it, it's mine.
What's it worth?
Start back up in 5 minutes?
I mean, a lot.
Take to the restroom. Are we taking a break? Is that what you said?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Even though all the doom and gloom and sales tax in our store, we're fairly immune to whatever's happening.
Yes, I
I
agree.
mean, sales tax is steady and dark store is not going to hit us big, so we don't have, the thing we don't have.
That's right.
But the other thing is too, what I've been reading is, when it comes to tax incentives, you give like a big box store tax incentives, and they turn around and are fighting for your, well, I mean, if those cities had known that this was coming, they would not have gotten those tax incentives. So it's somewhat,
Makes you be careful about
well, this is factored in. I mean, we're beyond, well, but there could be a wild oats thing, there could be a participating call center.
That's gonna be something.
But there has to be something to protect us. Because all of a sudden, those financials that elders run, those weren't based on drug store, those were based on retail operations, and now they're changing the rules. So, yeah, we're making sure we watch for that. But yeah, man, that would make me mad.
Oh, yeah.
Big retailer, that big break, and then,
How are you?
yeah.
Good.
People that are really deep into this.
Information, he basically that I received first election, it's no assessments, and it's not also just especially with this next one. It's interesting to hear like those records.
Luckily, we're not
I mean, we're just not seeing the same kinds of trends.
Overland Park's just crap.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And Merriam, the cash cows with all those car dealerships,
Totally
Yeah.
different challenges, even though we're
devalue
not
all
that
those.
far from each other. So
All that money that's
I
gonna
think
do.
it'll be interesting too. But I didn't feel like I should take photos, so we can snap it away.
Good, I appreciate it. I'm always happy to not be on anybody's camera.
I just felt like it wasn't the right time.
Oh, okay, I'm so glad that you're doing
Okay, that's perfect.
So I noticed that the neighbors
Okay.
right here by-
Got to take it out, did you see that? You know how that happened?
Where did you report it, sir?
No, I basically did this. I had some tree work scheduled, and so the guy came out and did an assessment of what was going on with my tree work. And I said, we should find out how much it would cost to take that down. And then, so he came back with a price, and so I talked to the neighbor about it. I says, really?
I don't know, I was gonna say, did they
I'm
send you
doing the project.
the Lone Ranger to the
Yes,
desk?
save some money. And so,
Yeah, that's a
So
good
that's
Okay,
one.
but let me go print you one.
I
You
use
just
mine.
want
Yeah,
this.
that's who the alarm goes.
Yeah, just
Right.
that some of this that they maybe.
I've been using it for 28 years.
You're hard to
Absolutely.
Well, they don't
Let me just go print it, I've got it.
clients.
Oh, okay, because my neighbors.
Yeah,
Some number.
yeah.
But then they never
started. Let's begin our Community Development Committee. We'll start with any public comments. If there's an opportunity for any members of the public to comment on anything really not on the agenda. Seeing none, we will move into our public presentations, which we have one on the replacement of the fire sprinkler heads at Sylvester Powell. Laura?
Oh, yeah, actually, we probably need to adopt a revised agenda for this evening since we did add this item, and my apologies, I forgot to mention that at the outset.
Okay, so let's adopt.
I move that we adopt the revised agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, thanks.
All those in
All right.
favor, indicate by saying aye.
All right, thank you. And thank you for allowing us to bring this forward. This issue, as I mentioned in the action item, which came out later, during a routine inspection late last year, the inspection firm noted a deficiency in the fire head sprinkler system. We had some questions about that deficiency and spent some time exploring exactly the root of the problem and what we needed to do to address that with some other firms, including some assistance from our on-call engineers at GBA. Because obviously the fire protection systems in a building and a facility of that size are subject to some National Fire Protection Association standards. The fire protection system on the north side of the building is original to the building, so it was 20 years old earlier this year. They have undergone routine maintenance on a quarterly basis since they were installed, and so really we're probably at the system's useful life anyway. But one of the things that as we really started to look at this, evaluating the scope of the project, was we have fire sprinkler heads located in the indoor pool area, embedded in ceilings, installed in such a way that we really needed to do some evaluation about whether or not structurally and aesthetically how we might approach this project without, just going in and ripping a big hole in the ceiling to accomplish that. So my hats have been off over the last several months to Aaron Cherry, our facilities and maintenance supervisor, and John Vaughn, as they have worked through a variety of issues and trying to make sure that we could do this in a way that was both safe and cost efficient. So following that evaluation, we finalized the scope of the project, and it will require removal and replacement of over 360 fire sprinkler heads on the north side of the building, so very significant. That work involves working at heights over the indoor pool, in the entry, hallway, and meeting rooms, the north gymnasium, as well as the office areas and hallways. So once we had identified the scope of the project, we put it out to bid. We did solicit quotes from 4 firms and received bids back from just 2. Those bids were included in the table in the action item. So we had one bid from Advantage Fire Protection Systems in the amount of $40,375, an American Fire Sprinkler for $69,963. With a 73% spread in the bids received, we went back to the drawing board again to make sure that we really understood what was driving those costs, and that if we were to recommend going with Advantage Fire Protection Systems, that we would be missing something and have a surprise later on. So we scheduled Advantage Fire Protection Systems to come in and really walk through each area of the building and look at and think about how they might approach, and they're having to take some modified approaches to different areas of the building. There's some tongue and groove. I mean, if you really, when you go into the community center and now start to look up, you'll notice the variety of different ceiling types that are present and the challenges that they're going to be facing. So we did not get that meeting scheduled in time to get the information on the agenda in accordance with the kind of our regular council approval process. But as of the first of this week, Aaron and John feel like they have sufficiently done the legwork, checked all the boxes, and feel as if all of their outstanding questions and concerns have been addressed. The nature of the work really requires it to be done while the facility is closed. During their recent site visit, they developed a plan based on the other work that is scheduled to occur during our upcoming facility maintenance closure. And they, based on the timing and the schedules and the work to be done by the other contractors, sort of laid out a 5-step process in order to get this accomplished within that 2-week time period that the facility will be closed. So it's going to be very time sensitive, but they feel like they are able to accomplish that within the bid price that they originally quoted. In addition, the work in the natatorium can only be done when the pool is drained, because we have to go in and use a lift and create some platforms to be able to reach the sprinkler heads in that area of the facility. So if we're not able to proceed with that work during the facility closure that's scheduled for August 19th through September 2nd, we either need to shut down at a later date for probably that 2-week period of time, or wait until our 2020 maintenance closure. And I think our concern is that with the deficiency in this fire protection system, we don't want to defer that until 2020. Because this was discovered in an inspection late in 2018, this project was obviously not included in the 2019 capital improvement budget for the Parks and Recreation Department. However, one of the projects that was included, which included replacement of the flooring in conference rooms A and B and the office areas, and after that project was bid, it generated about $85,000 in savings, which is more than sufficient to cover the cost of being able to accommodate this project that popped on the horizon after the budget was adopted. So I think, as I was talking with John and Aaron earlier this week, their concern is that if we wait until the 21st to actually have you approve it and then issue a notice to proceed, we're already 2 days behind the rest of the contractors when the work starts. And so what staff has recommended this evening, and certainly don't take this lightly, is that under our current ordinances, I do have the ability to authorize an emergency expenditure for facility improvements. Based on the information that we presented tonight, we would like to just acknowledge that we plan to proceed under those provisions of our code and bring that still bring that contract back to you on the 21st, but that would allow us to communicate with Advantage Fire Protection Systems to have them order the supplies and be positioned to accomplish that work with the facility closure.
Okay. We have any discussion?
Just a consideration. So do we put this on consent agenda then?
Well, that's still what the council's to approve, even though it's already been done.
Because we have to
So it's a ratification. It essentially becomes a ratification under the provisions of the ordinance. So I would probably put it on as a new business item, since you did not specifically take action on your committee agenda.
Okay.
I really appreciate the fact that you've given us an ability to use funds that we don't pay. That we did plan on. I appreciate that. That way we always know where money's coming from.
Just another question, if I could. With your executive powers,
That's about the extent of it.
does the mayor have to sign off on that too for you to do that, or
No, the ordinance would allow me to do that.
does he have similar powers?
I don't believe he does. So if we have a facility emergency, or a situation in that regard,
That's cool. I was just curious.
if we declare an emergency, a local emergency, so if it's a disaster of some sort, then the mayor and council have expenditure authority. That responsibility transitions to you all.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Yep.
Cool, thank you.
All right, anything else for Laura? So let's move on to our action items, which we have 4 of them. First up is the acceptance of the July 10th, 2019 Community Development Committee minutes.
Move to accept.
All right, next up, item 2, we have a resolution setting a public hearing for the purpose of determining the structure at 5399 Markway Street to be a dangerous structure and to cause said structure to be either repaired or demolished. Laura Smith.
Yes, and you definitely get third string. Jim Brown was originally supposed to be here this evening to present his findings and report, and then Brian Scott was going to pinch it for him, and you've got me, so my apologies. Really, all we are here to consider this evening is the process by which we move this conversation forward surrounding the potential condemnation and/or demolition of the structure at 5399 Markway, formerly the Mission Bowl bowling alley. As you know, the structure experienced a fire on the afternoon of April 3rd in 2015, which resulted in extensive damage to that building. Shortly after the fire, the owners of the business and the structure initiated plans to rebuild and reopen that business. But shortly thereafter encountered an issue where allegedly the restoration company that they had hired failed to properly secure the building from the elements, and that resulted in further damage to the structure. That claim has resulted in protracted litigation, including a bankruptcy filing that is still ongoing. So we have one proceeding in bankruptcy court and then a second civil case. In the meantime, there has been no action to restore the structure, and in fact, the owners have indicated that it is their intent not to rebuild or reopen the Mission Bowl facility. Over the years, some coming from several of you and others, we've received a number of inquiries and complaints regarding the appearance and condition of the building. Earlier this year, our land use attorney Pete Heaven entered a motion with the bankruptcy court requesting the court's permission to allow us to proceed with this process of declaring the structure dangerous and having it either repaired or demolished. The motion was granted by the court in June, so we did have to receive specific permission from the bankruptcy court to exercise our own police powers in this instance. So within the City of Mission, the Community Development Department is responsible for ensuring that all property meets the various building code and property safety code requirements and doesn't pose a risk to the general public. So Jim Brown is our building official, and representative from Consolidated Fire District Number 2 conducted an inspection of the building in accordance with the Kansas statutes that support and drive this process. It requires a written report from the building official to be prepared and presented to the City Council. The written report then kind of becomes the basis for the City Council to conduct a public hearing for the purpose of taking testimony from the owners or any other interested parties as to the condition of the structure and determining whether or not you should proceed with repairs or demolition and the time frame for which. So on July 8th, an inspection of the structure was completed. That exhibit and that report has been included in your packet. A copy of that report was sent to the owner, requesting a response as to the action they intended to take. That be submitted back to the building official by July 26th, and no response has been received from the property owner. So in accordance with the statutes, we're now presenting the report to the council and requesting you at your August 21st meeting to consider a resolution that would schedule the public hearing. The resolution setting the public hearing has to be published for 2 consecutive weeks on the same day of the week, at least 30 days prior to the date of the public hearing. So if you were to choose to adopt the resolution at the August 21st meeting, you could apply the following schedule to the process. You would adopt the resolution on August 21st. The first publication would be on August 27th, the second publication on September 3rd. Then, in order for it to come back through the committee process, you would be looking at holding that public hearing at your October 16th City Council meeting. So at the conclusion, if you were to adopt that resolution and hold that public hearing, at the conclusion of the public hearing, you adopt findings of fact, and then direct us to prepare a resolution stating whether or not the building should be repaired or demolished, would be considered at your November city council meeting. And once that resolution were to be adopted, we send copies to all interested parties via certified mail. So the October 16th meeting would be the opportunity for the public hearing and the opportunity for any interested parties to now speak in support of our opposition to the potential council action. Following that notice, if we're moving in that direction, we would move forward to solicit bids for demolition. The property owner has the ability to demolish the structure at their own expense, or if we do not have a response from the property owner, the city does have the ability to proceed with that demolition and then certify the cost of those demolitions back against the property through the county. So I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Do we know what priority that lien would have on the property if we paid to demolish?
I believe, we will confirm that, but I believe we will be in the first position.
Well, according to this timetable, the earliest that demolition could happen would be the end of January.
Right, yes, after the first of the year.
At one point, didn't the contractor file some objection to the city money for this?
When we,
Maybe I missed it.
no, you are correct. So when we filed our motion with the bankruptcy court requesting permission to move forward in the process, the restoration contractor did file an objection to that, which was denied by the court. And so we have been given permission to proceed with our process.
So how do we set with property tax? Is there a tax still on the land to the landowner? And because it's a lease situation that the property owner where the property is not usable, how is that tax? What's the tax structure for that?
I'm not sure I'm entirely clear on the question, but the property is taxed. There's an underlying landowner and then a separate building owner with a land lease situation. The county assesses a property tax or an appraised value to that piece of property like they would any other piece of property, and they've done that, and the taxes are not delinquent currently on that property.
Any other questions from the board?
Council.
Council?
Non-consent.
All right, let's move on to action item number 3, an agreement with the State of Kansas Department of Transportation Alternatives Project.
Great, you have heard about this agreement with the Kansas Department of Transportation through our application for funds through the Safe Routes to School program to receive funding to apply toward the installation of bike lanes along Lamar as we do the surface treatment to that work in the summer of 2020. So this contract just enables all of that to take place in the amounts presented, not to exceed $68,000, which is the maximum amount, 80% of the total estimated cost, which we have at $85,000. The status of the project right now is design work is underway. We'll have those plans to the state shortly, and plan to move swiftly towards summer of 2020, actually, when construction season will allow us to go forward with the project. Great.
Quick question. Since we're about a year out, is it possible that that $85,000 can be included by next year? I know it's, bike lanes, but.
Yeah, and I can add, we can kind of dive into the numbers more, but I think because we've always considered those bike lanes within the whole scope of the project, that and some of the elements of the project, like the spot curb repair and sidewalks and things like that, if we were off in some fashion, we could scale back in one element of the project to come up with more of our costs.
And we got cost estimates with the CIP this year, so that figure still is looking good, so I think we'll be fine.
We have some.
Council, consent.
Item number 4, a resolution authorizing the release of escrow funds for property purchased by the City of Mission at 5703-5715 Johnson Drive.
Yes, again, Brian was going to present this, so too bad we didn't do this in July because it would feel like Christmas in July for the Owens at Mission Pet Mart. Back in 2006, the city of Mission purchased property that has a Mission Pet Mart at this location in order to remove it from the Rock Creek floodplain. We purchased about $7 million worth of property along that Johnson Drive corridor over a 2 to 3 year period. At that time, I believe that there had been a dry cleaner that was in that area previously, and so when we went through the purchase process, there were funds that were escrowed in the event that any remediation would need to be accomplished. And so at the time of purchase, the sellers, Chad and Joyce Owens, were required to put $7,500 of the sale proceeds into an escrow with Chicago Title Company, LLC. We got a call from Chicago Title Company recently that said, hey, we're sitting on $7,500 in escrow funds, what should we do with that? So we went back, asked John Gilchrist at Payne & Jones, who handled all of the real estate acquisition for us at that time, to take a look, and there was no remediation required, so we're requesting that those funds be released back to the Owens.
I have one question. The 2006 agreement states that the property contains environmental hazards and defines that as the contamination, and then now we're saying there ended up not being any, so I was just wondering what that process was for assuring that there wasn't.
So we would have conducted, we did, where we did phase 1 environmentals on all the property that we acquired, and where necessary, we proceeded with phase 2. So we do have the environmentals that were completed on all those properties to determine what, if any, remediation was required.
Any other questions for Laura? Consent or not?
Consent.
All right, let's move into discussion items, and Laura Smith, we have an update on hazard planters.
You're doing overtime today.
Happy Wednesday.
That's right. Happy Wednesday. So thank you. I know that we've got a couple of folks representing the neighborhood, excuse me, who are here with us this evening. So Ron Monson and Sarah Newell, right, are here, so thank you for being here. We also have Dave Meninga with GBA, who kind of has been to the council on previous occasions to talk about this issue and worked with the working group at both their March and their May meetings to look at options and alternatives. So really what I tried to do in the report that was provided and what I had committed to the working group to do was to kind of try to capture all of the history and discussion that has surrounded the installation of the planters along Hodges at 61st Terrace, 62nd Street, and 62nd Terrace over the years, stretching all the way back to the 1970s, and try to memorialize that in one place, as well as then to capture the discussion and the conversations that we had with the neighbors and the working group around potential design alternatives for those planters. So as we've, and I'm going to just touch on a couple of high points, and then we're going to get a little bit more into those working group discussions, because I think most of us are familiar with the background and history. But as we know, originally when we look at Ames imagery from the 1950s, those streets were dead-end streets. Hodges did not yet exist. So those streets, again, were always dead-ended, and then in the 70s, the guardrails were installed along Hodges in response to requests from residents who expressed concerns about an apartment development that was under consideration by the city of Mission. As it turns out, the apartment complex was not constructed, but the Lido Villas condominiums were, and then several single-family homes along Hodges were also built. And so that's really what prompted their original installation of the guardrails. And then in the early to mid-90s, the residents of the neighborhood approached the city and had some questions or concerns about the aesthetics of the guardrails and asked if they could work to remove those and install planters in their place that might provide something that was a little more attractive for the neighborhood's considerations. What we found over every 20 years or so when we have a conversation around this is that the neighbors have become very actively engaged and involved in those conversations and are certainly very passionate about that. Following a police pursuit in the spring of 2018, one of the planters was damaged. One of the planters at the 61st Terrace intersection was damaged. And so staff sort of re-engaged in discussions regarding the planters. The city, I think, has had some areas of concern over the years that included things like emergency services responses being potentially hindered by not allowing direct access on Hodges, snowplow operations, which require the snowplow trucks, and really this applies to snowplows, trash trucks, public safety vehicles, things having to back down the street. And then the fact that the planters were really don't conform with highway safety standard requirements, particularly as they relate to both reflectivity and kind of breakaway or crash requirements. So oftentimes a guardrail or a barrier of some sort is intended to deflect a vehicle as opposed to resulting in a more significant crash. But there isn't any particular law or regulation related to those standards that would require the immediate removal of the planters that exist. So when we started the conversation again in the summer of 2018, we once again sought overwhelming response and support for the neighborhood that they remain in place, or that something remain in their place. So their concerns were expressed through form letters that were circulated by residents and submitted to the city council, as well as a variety of other letters, phone calls, emails, etc. All of those, again, have been captured and included and incorporated into one spot so that if we have this conversation in another 20 years, we won't have to go back and recreate that wheel, if you will. So based on that neighborhood response, we held a public meeting at the community center on the 29th of November, mailed out postcards inviting people to attend, and we had more than 45 area residents and neighbors that attended that meeting. The purpose of that meeting was really to make sure, although we had expressed kind of our concerns from the city's perspective, was to make sure that we had the opportunity in that setting to hear and understand the concerns of the neighborhood so that we could clearly document those and think about how we moved forward. So at that meeting, several issues or points were presented by residents, including a belief that dead-end streets result in increased property values. There was a concern that removal of the planters would increase traffic in the neighborhood and down those streets. Support that that dead-end streets allow for the children to play, cycle, or walk to school more safely from those neighborhoods. Dead-end streets or the planters help to build a sense of community and where all residents really know one another and have built the social interactions and those relationships. And that the planters increase neighborhood safety and security by serving as a deterrent to crime. Everyone who spoke at the meeting on November 29th expressed opposition to removing the planters. There were no residents at that meeting who spoke in favor of their removal. And I know the mayor and several members of the city council, along with staff, were there to hear and document those concerns. So following that meeting, what staff and the council committed to was really a review of options and recommendations for alternatives potentially to the planters, and first and foremost that residents would be kept informed and engaged and involved in that process going forward, and there wouldn't be any surprises in terms of what got carried back to the city council for discussion and consideration. So after that November meeting, we sat down with the traffic engineers, Mr. Maniga from GBA, to have some initial conversations to kind of talk about those concerns, understand a little bit more about street design standards and traffic control measures that we might take into account. We formed that neighborhood working group to review and discuss potential design alternatives, and we met on two separate occasions on the 14th of March and the 23rd of May. Members of the working group included Kathy Boutros, Jay Culkin, Susie Genova, Ron Munson, Sarah Newell, Adam Nigg, Kelly and Kathy Peetham, and Amber Vigil. And I think we had really very productive and engaged discussions again at both of those working group meetings. So at our March meeting, Mr. Meniga provided a PowerPoint presentation, which has been included in your packet, with a number of design alternatives and options that were available to really address both neighborhood and city concerns with varying degrees of success. We spent the time at that March meeting to work through those options and alternatives, some of which had very strong reactions. We did include the typical guardrail as the last item in that, and there were a variety of other things that you can see there. As we worked through and discussed each one of those design alternatives and options, the members of the working group really continued to express very strong opinions that some sort of hard barrier, a gate, a wall, a planter, something of that nature should be installed at each intersection. And that really stemmed from the belief that that type of barrier served to deter and prevent crime in the area. So whether it was allowing for an easy access for someone who might have committed a crime in the neighborhood, or I think there were some concerns expressed about, as you know, a potential criminal was casing a neighborhood and looking for exit routes or exit strategies, that those hard barriers served as a deterrent to that, therefore making the area safer and helping to add to an increased property values. So during our March meeting, we brainstormed with GPA and sketched out a design alternative that basically included installing an island within the intersection with a design, and that design also included pavers and a gate. So it was kind of a blend of really at least three of the options that were included in the PowerPoint presentation, trying to balance the neighborhood desire for that hard barrier with something that was an aesthetically pleasing solution, but that would in some fashion help to address the city's concerns about particularly access for public safety vehicles and response. So GBA was tasked to come back to the next meeting with a revised design and some cost information. And so when we met in May, the design alternative that was included in your packet was presented and sort of critiqued and evaluated. So just highlight a couple of things on each of the features included in this design. So we had some conversations initially about why not just curb it along Hodges, create green space, and essentially dead end the streets again. Unfortunately, there's not sufficient stormwater structures in the area to handle the stormwater runoff from those streets, so the water comes down and runs onto Hodges and is collected along Hodges. So simply adding a curb at this point doesn't allow for that stormwater flow to go as anticipated. So the island concept sort of came about and would allow for, so it would be unconnected, hence the island, that would allow for that stormwater to flow onto Hodges. And so right now, until such time as you were to potentially do a full depth reconstruction along those streets and consider the installation of more permanent stormwater structures, anything we look at would really need to factor in the ability to allow that water to continue to exit onto Hodges. So the gate, which is shown as the black line on the drawing, as proposed, would be locked, and public safety vehicles would be provided with keys allowing them to unlock for the purpose of exit only. While this option doesn't provide for better ingress from the west, it does eliminate the need for ambulances or fire trucks to back down the street at the conclusion of a call. This is something that there are other places in our city where the fire department has keys and can access gates And part of what we discussed with the working group was that most of the response from particularly a fire or an ambulance standpoint is not coming from the fire station on Martway, it's coming from the fire station on 63rd Street, so coming at their neighborhood from a little bit different direction.
Laura, we only look at a locked gate with a key versus something electronic, if they have a code, they just push the code in and open. We had an option.
So we talked,
Did you look at the fee for that? No.
we didn't look at the cost
No,
for
the
that.
gate cost, I don't think. No, we didn't look at the cost.
I mean, it's certainly an option that you could have, but it was something that could be done electronically. Obviously, then that addresses, so I'll come back to that in just a minute. So then the gates would be designed to meet highway safety or crash breakaway requirements and signed with the appropriate reflective signage to make sure that drivers would be aware of their presence. The pavers through the middle of that island would be required to support the weight of those public safety vehicles exiting those neighborhoods. They, as you can see from some of the examples in the PowerPoint presentation, are intended to allow the grass to grow up in between, so it looks like green space. But again, if we don't install those pavers, then you would just have a mess in terms of island. And I think that really designed to address the fire apparatus and the ambulance. I think we heard the chief say that if he needed to get there in a hurry, he'd probably go around any planter or barricade or island that might be there. The cost of the design solution was estimated at somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000 per intersection. And included in the report, I did want to just include a matrix or a table that sort of showed and identified the issue or concern, primarily where that was coming from, residents or city, and whether or not this design alternative or how this design alternative might address that. So obviously, by leaving the streets barricaded, this design solution would address and support the neighborhood concern for increased traffic, because you would not be increasing and opening those streets up. Access for public safety vehicles, which was a city concern, would be addressed partially because of that egress-only issue. Access for snowplows, trash trucks, any other type of delivery vehicle would not be addressed. The use of this gate and the pavers would be probably really restricted to just those public safety vehicles. Again, the gate, the hard barrier, would continue to serve as a deterrent to crime from the neighborhood perspective. And then improving the crash safety actually was primarily a city concern. So I'll update that. And the ability to install the gates that met those standards would address that issue from the city's perspective.
I have a question. Why did you exclude the snowplows from access?
You could allow that. It just becomes more of a functionality issue. I mean, so we could certainly open that up, and then our crews could be provided with the keys as well to come into and out of that gate. Probably, I would guess, I haven't plowed those streets, I'm going to look to Brent, but I would imagine that you're probably plowing from east to west, and so if you could open those up and push the snow out,
Yes.
as opposed to having it pile it at the end of the street. So we could certainly do that. It's not we're not excluded from that.
Yeah, and where you run into the issue, curves on both sides, when you're pushing down those streets, you end up with piles right there against that curve where those gates would be open. So you'd be trying to push over the pavers and the grass area, and you'd probably end up doing more damage than good at that point.
So that mesh material could handle the weight of a trash truck then?
It can. The way they explained it, it can handle the weight. It's just, as we pile snow up there, you just pull the plows across it and stuff like that, you probably damage it more than just driving across it.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And I think from the trash truck perspective, I don't want to I think I recall that, I think the neighborhood concern was the more people who had keys and access and the ability to unlock the gate, the greater the potential that it would remain unlocked and that then that hard barrier would be removed. We were originally slated to kind of bring this design alternative back to you in July, but as you may recall, our July agendas got really big, really fast, and so we deferred that to our conversation this evening, so we appreciate everybody's patience in doing that. So really, I'll just kind of review some of the options which we included, and this is not an all-inclusive list. So certainly there are, as I mentioned, the design alternative that was included in your packet was sort of a compilation of all of the things that we saw and talked about. And I would have had another probably 20 pages if we, kind of created an alternative for each one of those. But I know that I can answer questions, Mr. Menninger can answer questions, Brent can certainly answer questions if the council has thoughts about other alternatives. So as you look at the options, in terms of the recommendation coming from the working group, we felt the following really could be evaluated and considered. So you could remove the remaining planters and install the design alternative at all three intersections in the way described above at an estimated cost of somewhere between $36,000 and $45,000 to do that. You could install the design alternative at the 61st Terrace intersection where one of the planters is currently missing at a cost of more in the range of $12,000 to $15,000. If this design solution were something that the council was interested in pursuing, I think from our perspective, we would probably suggest proceeding with one intersection as opposed to all three, because I think that would give both the neighborhood and the city the opportunity to see whether it's working and meets the goals and objectives that we laid out there. So regardless of that, if that were the option that were selected, then reflective signage would be installed on the planters that might remain at 62nd Street and 62nd Terrace. Another option is to essentially wait and on the installation of that design solution at any of the intersections. You could replace the planter at 61st Terrace and install the appropriate reflective signage on all the planters, and then consider installing some sort of alternative design at whatever point in the future that those streets were reconstructed, where you could address stormwater, and that might even open up an option for other things that aren't available to us today. The estimated total cost for that is about $2,500. I know that there have been some questions that have been posed previously about the liability because we've identified those planters as they exist today as not meeting those highway crash standards. And it doesn't, according to the city attorney, does not specifically increase our risk or liability, but it's an important part of the conversation. Obviously, removing all the planters and opening the streets to two-way traffic, and you'll see I bolded and underlined that in your report. Certainly that was kind of where we started in this conversation about a year ago, and this option is not one that is supported at all by residents of the area. But we felt it was important, to include that. So I've had some questions about, what about just the gate? So in order to address the crash standards of the planters, what about just the installation of the gates? The working group did talk about that, and I believe moved away from that in part because of some of the aesthetic concerns of just that they felt, I think that was more similar to the guardrails that had been there previously. Yes.
I just wanted, could you clarify what the cost of that option would be? So as opposed to, the $36,000 to $45,000 to replace them all, or the $15,000 to do one, what would it be on the gates alone?
You are probably looking somewhere in closer to the $6,000 to $10,000 range, depending on how you would block the gates or control the access through those gates. Regardless of how this would move forward, we will work to make sure. One of the things that we heard through the course of these discussions was that the signage at the east end of the neighborhood was not particularly clear for drivers to understand that there was no outlet on those streets. So if that were to remain the case, that we would look at improved signage there, so that those people that are more unfamiliar with the neighborhood could have better luck in navigating that street configuration. So with that, I'm certainly happy to answer questions. I know that Mr. Manager would be as well. I don't know if the members of our working group have anything else that they would like to add, but.
Yeah, I think that we went into this with the premise that the neighborhood would be involved in the process of the discussion, and they have. These options are obviously, number 4 is not something that's supported by the resident group. So I think we had said that we wanted them to trust our process, and I believe that given that, we need to honor the recommendations of the group. I know that staff is not making a specific recommendation. My thought is that your suggestion that we do just the one that's down and allow some time for that to set in and see how it works before we address the others, because I believe that if we do nothing, we don't really know what time frame the streets are going to be milled and overlaid, and I think it just leaves it as a temporary barrier that's not going to be acceptable.
Yeah, and I would agree with Ken's comments on that, and just thank the residents who are willing to participate in the process. And I would second that I would either be in favor of trying one of the design and leaving the other 2 in place, or I still personally have safety concerns about the planters as they are, so I would also be open to entertaining the full design option on one and replacement with just the gates on the 2 others, and so that would give us some more flexibility but address those safety, both crash safety concerns and emergency vehicle access concerns at the 2 other streets.
I'm fully supportive of what the work group has come up with. If they go to a gate scenario, I would like a cost breakdown of electronic, because if you look at the time for emergency response, to come in and go back out, it's probably not a whole lot different than having to get out of the vehicle, use your keys. Is there not, I mean, in this day and age with technology, do you not have they have a code, and by the time they hit the street, it's opened?
That would just be when they're leaving though. I don't believe they would be using it to enter into an emergency situation.
My concern is that you're going to have power for that, and that's going to increase cost.
We can certainly, I mean, it won't take us that long to give you some cost estimates on that. But again, I think Councilmember Inman is correct that I think it wouldn't change how we envision them entering the neighborhood, simply exiting the neighborhood, where while time is still critical, potentially even on an ambulance call more so than a fire truck, but you really just don't then have these giant fire apparatus backing down, backing down the street.
And you said they're familiar with the key system as well, right?
Laura, I also like the idea of maybe doing one if this is the route that we go, mainly because I know it looks nice and green on paper, but thinking about this probably won't have any irrigation happening to the grass, and it's going to be kind of isolated by itself, that most of the time it might be green, brownish, and that may not aesthetically end up being exactly what the group is looking for. So keeping the door open for something down the road would make sense.
And what Hillary said is, who's going to mow that? Is that going to be a mowed situation where the city would have to?
We'd pick it up, and my guess is we'd have our contractual mowers pick up that island. They're mowing some sections of KDOT right away, pretty close over there.
Oh,
so
okay, cool.
Not too far.
I think there's
Couldn't it be landscaped with something other than grass that requires?
Wild.
I think I'm wondering about maybe some kind of ground cover.
Yeah.
I've got this stuff in my.
Revenue producing crop.
It just keeps growing.
Thinking outside the box.
think from a timing perspective, you're absolutely right. If you're able to just hit that button and go, as opposed to get out and unlock, you're gonna, you're gonna save time.
But if you've done research on it and it's cost prohibitive, don't pursue it. I'm just looking at, that's the primary reason from my perspective that the planners were a problem, was the emergency response. Other than that, I think the neighborhood needs to keep their own neighborhood. I think that's what they want.
Laura, if we left two existing planters on those other intersections, would reflectors would be put on those? Yes.
Signage.
Signage.
I'm good with the replacing the one broken planter, and then if we were to add the gates to the other two, are we still essentially in the same place where we were back in November, where we'd have 2/3 of that group unhappy with our what we had settled on? Or
I'd have to ask
the lack of support?
your neighborhood residents to maybe speak to that. So the question was, if we looked at doing the island installation at 61st Terrace to test and make sure that it sort of meets what our intentions were, both from your perspective and our perspective, and then we looked at gates only as we evaluated that on the other two. So taking the planters out and putting gates in, do you feel like the neighborhood would be upset with that alternative?
I can't answer for everybody, but I would imagine that if you're just going to do part of it right now, I would just leave those other two planters in place because they seem to like what's there.
I'd rather look at that than a gate, since my house is at the end of the street. By the planter boxes, that's something that's much more aesthetic to me when I walk out of my house every single day versus just a big iron gate.
Well, what we can do is we can then summarize, if there's some consensus around a direction to move forward, we can summarize that and present that back. We've got a mailing list of the neighborhood already compiled, and we can certainly send that out and solicit some additional feedback if you're interested in hearing that from the group as you move the conversation forward. That's an easy thing, that's an easy thing to do if we have some direction on a solution.
I just think that if we're really gonna do some future work in terms of streets, it makes sense not to do anything until that takes place and just address the one that's currently out.
Where are those streets on the street inventory?
We don't know yet.
We've got them all listed.
No, I know we do.
I know, but we've upset the apple cart and just started on our new street asset inventory and reprioritizing all those, so.
Laura, I just want to ask, or maybe to the group, why this wasn't like for like I'm just generally curious.
The white.
So, if I'm remembering correctly, and Dave helped me with this, but I believe that the neighborhood concern was that those weren't a hard barrier. So those really didn't encourage, because they're plastic and you can drive over them, and kind of mow them over if you wanted to, that it would, particularly from that, serving as a deterrent to crime. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically this all started because of a police chase, and that would not stop a police chase down the road. I think that's what people were concerned about.
Right, and people coming down Hodges, turning onto those streets, people drive way too fast on Hodges every day, all the time.
Do you think people would deliberately turn right through those barriers to?
If they were trying to get away from the police,
yes.
they would go right through that in a heartbeat.
Okay, in the once every 25 years when the police chases are, I don't know. I think those barriers would be pretty effective in stopping the everyday person who's traveling on Hodges from turning on the street. If it's
Not
aesthetic, then
necessarily.
let's just call it that, right? But
I've seen people drive on our neighbor's on their lawn to get around.
They did it yesterday.
yeah.
Around the road close sign, they drove around the sign.
On the
Through
drive.
our-
I'm not saying that I'm opposed to the planters either, but I think we should at least call it what it is. It's an aesthetic thing from the discussion I've heard.
Oh, part of it, yeah, part of it.
I can't really believe that people would see those and just decide, well, I'm going to drive through them anyway. I don't think that happens.
I just saw an
Sure, maybe
Amazon
if it's
truck do it the other day.
Police chase.
Is there a cost breakdown on the white thing? Just curious.
Cost breakdown on the white thing. I don't know what the official term is. White things.
I guess part of where
Very
I'm going with that is, I know that there are a lot of people in the neighborhood that like the aesthetics of the planters. I can agree that if I lived on that street, I'd probably like it too. At what
And
point?
there is another factor, the planters are sitting on a foundation.
Sure.
So you're gonna have to repave that area anyway.
Right. I do wonder though, at what point, if we're talking about more expensive options and, ongoing maintenance and stuff, does maybe some of that responsibility fall on people that live in that area if we're gonna, if we're gonna take that input from people in the neighborhood and we're gonna incur higher cost options to maintain some of those aesthetics, should there be some assessment on people that live on those streets? I don't know. I think it's worth that conversation.
I think the maintenance of the planters has been pretty much done by the neighborhood.
Yeah, the neighborhood has been
Right.
taking
No,
care of
I
those
agree.
planters
I agree.
anyway.
It has, but replacements, if there's problems with them, if something cracks in that foundation, for example,
And we're talking about a
Is-
$6,000 option versus a $45,000 option.
that's all I'm getting at, is I think there's some discussion we should probably have there about cost responsibilities if we're looking at the more expensive, more aesthetic options.
Well, I think that the issue is that we created the barriers as a city before. And so that was really initiated by the council in response to the neighborhood. And that's been the history since
Well, it was
the
50 years ago.
70s, yeah.
And actually, rereading some of those minutes from the early 70s, a lot of the people were coming to the council meeting asking to have them removed. That was the majority of the conversation within the minutes. Now in the mid-90s, we also provided minutes to the opposite of that, where most of the people want to keep. I think that's still the sentiment, is most people want.
Do you feel comfortable with this option?
Well, which option?
The one where we just replace the one and replace it with the...
I'm fine with that as long as we put some signage up and make it reflective. But
I'd like to ask what people think of that option versus doing the other two as just gates, or hear a little more about the concern about the just gates. And I get that the gate is viewed as less attractive to the planters, but the complete design solution also incorporates the gate. So I think we're talking about moving towards that solution or moving towards an option that would give us greater flexibility. I'd like to hear more about sort of the one complete solution, two gate option.
But I don't think the gate is necessarily the end game. If we have to do a full depth reconstruction and do stormwater and everything,
Right.
the gate may be
But it would address some of the safety
gone.
concerns in the meantime about the cost of a planter.
But then on the same token, then you're spending money twice.
Right, and I kind of want to really look at the work group that came together and put a lot of time and effort into trying to come up with a solution, and I would hate to just completely start over after all their hard effort. That's kind of my point.
Well, I'd want to get their input if they're gonna do, if you wanted to do that, I'd want to get their input.
Yeah, no, that's why all I was saying was I'd like to see
Yeah.
what the group
No,
thought about
absolutely.
those two options.
Why don't we put those two options together and we can reconvene the working group and then, disseminate that to the larger neighborhood and come back to you with that feedback as you make a final decision.
Would be comprehensively if you had a category that defined their recommendations and preferences and the cost for both.
Between those two.
Yes. Okay.
Any other questions for Laura? All right. Laura, do you have any department updates for us?
I do not.
Okay. I believe that concludes our...
Oh, I do.
So close.
So close. I'm so sorry. I just want to run through, we've talked a little bit with the sprinkler head replacement, but I wanted to just, for those of you who maybe haven't seen it at the community center, just in this setting, run through the improvements and the maintenance that will be completed during the facility closure, which has been communicated, it's been posted at the facility, communicated to our members. So the community center will be closed from Monday, August 19th through Monday, September 2nd, reopening on that Tuesday following Labor Day at 5:30 in the morning. So during that time, we're going to be doing the following. Excuse me, resurfacing the hardwood floors in the north gym, the south gym, the 2 racquetball courts, and the second floor aerobics room. And it is really, I will tell you, the resurfacing of the hardwood floors. So each year we refinish the hardwood floors. This is taking off all of the markings and really getting those floors back to kind of their original state and then building them back up. So the dust created with that and the odors and things is really the primary driver for the complete facility closure, because I just don't think it will be comfortable for folks.
So 2 weeks it will be closed.
2 weeks it will be closed, and yes.
So last year when we did some work in the pool area, we had the aquatic center open in the mornings.
It will be open in the mornings as well, yes. So in addition to the resurfacing of the hardwood floors, we're going to be putting new flooring, which is a luxury vinyl tile in meeting rooms A and B, the adult lounge, and the common area of the administrative offices. So those areas are carpeted now, but as we have talked with our user groups, specifically the Stroke Foundation is the primary user of conference rooms A and B at this point, as well as looking at future flexibility for how those spaces could be used, whether for fitness activities or rentals. The luxury vinyl tile provided a really nice option and alternative as opposed to the carpet. We will be installing carpet in the first floor offices and the second floor programming office. Again, removing and replacing the fire sprinkler heads, 360 of those. Painting 3 stairwells in the lifeguard room, and completing some repairs to the pool pack. So again, those are out there. I don't know that they're out on our website yet, but we'll get those out before the end of this week, so to give people enough time. And yes, we'll also been working to make sure we clearly understand the hours for the outdoor pool, but it will be open for lap swimming, I think starting at 5:30.
The new signage around the walking trail looks good too.
Is that all?
That is all I promise. Adjourned, so I can't say anything more, right?
Rubbing on faces.
Oh, boy, right.